The crisp autumn air, smelling of wood smoke and decaying leaves, should have been calming. Instead, it felt charged, electric with the tension emanating from the woman standing on the porch across the street. My hand tightened on the leather leash, a reflexive action to the storm brewing in our idyllic suburban neighborhood. At the end of that leash sat Luna, my 2-year-old Siberian Husky, her striking blue eyes looking up at me with an expression of pure, blissful ignorance. A gentle breeze ruffled her thick black and white coat, and her tail, a perfect snowy plume, gave a slight thump-thump against the perfectly manicured grass of my own front lawn. Our neighborhood, Maple Creek Estates, was the kind of place people dream of when they think of the perfect suburb. The houses were immaculate, the lawns were greener than a Crayola crayon, and the sense of order was palpable. This order was maintained, enforced, and worshipped by our homeowners association, and its most zealous disciple was Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable lived directly across from me. Her house was a beige testament to conformity, and her lawn was her life's work, a seamless, weedless emerald carpet that she guarded with the ferocity of a dragon guarding its hoard. She was the neighborhood watch, the architectural review committee, and the unofficial queen of the HOA, all rolled into one formidable, scowling package. The incident that shattered the afternoon peace was, in the grand scheme of things, utterly insignificant. Luna, who possessed the typical husky's mischievous intelligence and boundless curiosity, had spotted a particularly plump and audacious squirrel taunting her from the base of Mrs. Gable's prized Japanese maple. In a single, fluid motion of pure canine excitement, Luna lunged. The leash went taut in my hand, and despite my firm grip, her front paws landed for no more than 3 seconds on the sacred edge of Mrs. Gable's lawn. I reacted instantly. "Luna, no! Heel!" Luna, well-trained despite her playful streak, immediately recoiled, sitting back on my property with a guilty flick of her ears. She hadn't dug, she hadn't barked, she hadn't so much as disturbed a single blade of grass. But the invisible boundary had been crossed. The screen door of Mrs. Gable's house flew open with a sharp bang. "You? I saw that!" Her voice, a high-pitched screech that could curdle milk, sliced through the air. "Your wild animal was on my property, again." I took a deep, steadying breath, determined to remain the calm adult in this situation. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Gable. A squirrel distracted her. She was only there for a second. It won't happen again." Mrs. Gable marched to the edge of her porch, her hands planted firmly on her hips. Her face was a thundercloud of pure indignation. A second is all it takes. A second to bring fleas, to ruin the soil composition. This is the 3rd time this month I've seen that beast sniffing around my property line. I have warned you about its presence. Beast was a bit much. Luna was currently trying to lick a fallen leaf. I had to bite back a sarcastic retort. "Mrs. Gable, I assure you, Luna is perfectly healthy. She's on preventative medication for fleas, and she is always on her leash. I am doing my best to be a responsible owner." This was a long-standing Cold War. When I first moved in with a husky puppy, Mrs. Gable had made her disapproval known. She'd leave passive-aggressive notes about high-energy breeds and their destructive tendencies. She'd watch from her window every time I took Luna out, just waiting for a misstep. "Your best isn't good enough," she snapped. "This is a community with standards. We have rules for a reason. People can't just let their animals run rampant wherever they please." "She didn't run rampant," I countered, my voice firmer than I intended. "Her paws touched your lawn. I apologized. The situation is resolved." "Oh, it's far from resolved," she said, a venomous glint in her eyes. "I've had it. I have warned you and warned you. This time, you've gone too far. You'll be hearing from the authorities." With that theatrical declaration, she spun around, marched back into her house, and slammed the door. The silence she left behind was more unnerving than her shouting. I stood frozen for a moment, the leash slack in my hand. The authorities, the police, over this, the sheer absurdity of it was mind-boggling. I looked down at Luna, who tilted her head as if to ask what all the fuss was about. I sighed, rubbing her behind the ears. "Come on, girl. Let's go for a walk and get away from the crazy." As we walked the perfectly paved sidewalks of Maple Creek Estates, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Mrs. Gable was known for her dramatics, but this felt different. She was vindictive enough to actually call the police. My mind started racing. What would happen? Would I get a fine? A formal warning? Could the HOA try to force me to get rid of Luna? That last thought sent a chill down my spine. Before I even adopted Luna, knowing the reputation of HOAs, I had done my due diligence. I had downloaded the full 150-page PDF of the Maple Creek Estate's covenants, conditions, restrictions. I had spent an entire evening reading it, highlighting the section on pets. I needed to be sure I was on solid ground. I cut our walk short and headed home, my mind a whirl of legalese and what-if scenarios. I sat on my porch, Luna dozing at my feet, and pulled up the HOA bylaws on my tablet. I scrolled straight to Article 7, Section 4, Household Pets. My finger traced the lines of text on the screen, my memory confirming what I had read all those months ago. An hour ticked by. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the street. Just as I started to think or hope that Mrs. Gable's threat was just hot air, I saw it. A police cruiser turning slowly onto our street. It glided to a stop right at the curb between my house and hers. My stomach did a nervous flip. She actually did it. Two officers got out. One was a tall, seasoned officer with a calm, seen-it-all demeanor. The other was younger, a woman with a professional but slightly weary expression, as if she already knew this was going to be one of those calls. They walked up my driveway. "Good afternoon, sir," the senior officer said. "Are you the resident here?" "Yes, officer. I'm Mark," I said, standing up from my chair. Luna, ever the friendly ambassador, stood as well, her tail giving a hopeful wag. "We received a call from a neighbor, a Mrs. Gable," the female officer began, her eyes glancing from me to Luna. "She's alleging that your dog was trespassing on her property and that you were uncooperative." I took a breath. This was it. "Officers, I'd be happy to explain what happened. My dog's name is Luna. About an hour ago, she was distracted by a squirrel, and for about 3 seconds, her front paws were on the edge of Mrs. Place's, Gable's lawn. I immediately corrected her and brought her back onto my own property. I apologized to Mrs. Gable, but she was quite upset." The senior officer nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Gable seems to believe this is a violation of your HOA rules and constitutes a nuisance." "I understand she believes that," I said, choosing my words carefully, "but with all due respect to her, she is mistaken." The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "Are you familiar with your HOA bylaws regarding pets, sir?" A small smile touched my lips. I couldn't help it. "Intimately familiar, officer. I read them cover to cover before I even brought Luna home. I knew living in an HOA with a husky might require me to be extra diligent." I picked up my tablet from the porch table. "May I?" I asked, holding it out. The senior officer gestured for me to continue. "According to Article 7, Section 4, Subsection A," I began, my voice clear and confident. "It states that common household pets, such as dogs and cats, are permitted, provided they are not kept, bred, or maintained for any commercial purpose. Subsection B states that all pets must be kept on a leash and under the owner's direct control when in any common areas or on any portion of the property visible to the public. Luna was on her leash and under my control. Subsection C requires owners to immediately remove and dispose of any pet waste. That's not an issue here." I paused for effect, looking both officers in the eye. What the bylaws don't say is what's important here. There is absolutely no clause, no sentence, no word that prohibits a leashed animal from momentarily and accidentally stepping onto a neighbor's property. There are broad statutes about not creating a nuisance, but a 3-second paw placement, with no damage, no noise, and no waste, could never reasonably be defined as such. I swiped the screen. "I have the entire document right here if you'd like to verify." The two officers exchanged a look. It was a subtle glance, but it spoke volumes. It was a look of two professionals who realized they had been called out to settle a childish squabble by someone with too much time on their hands. The senior officer finally spoke, a hint of tired amusement in his voice. "That won't be necessary, sir. You've clearly done your homework. Thank you for your time. We'll just have another chat with Mrs. Gable." A profound sense of relief washed over me as they turned and walked across the street. I gave Luna a triumphant scratch behind the ears. "Good girl," I whispered. "You did nothing wrong." I watched from my porch as the officer spoke with Mrs. Gable on her doorstep. Her arms were waving, her finger pointing accusingly at my house. The officers remained stoic. Their body language was calm, professional, and firm. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw Mrs. Gable's shoulders, which were ramrod straight with indignation when they arrived, slowly begin to slump. The pointing stopped. Her head drooped. The officers gave her a final nod, turned, got back in their cruiser, and drove away, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. Mrs. Gable stood on her porch for a long time, a solitary statue of defeated fury. Finally, she retreated into her house, not with a slam, but with a quiet, almost resigned click of the door. The war, it seemed, was over, and I had won. An hour later, as dusk settled over Maple Creek Estates, I was putting away my gardening tools when Mrs. Gable's door opened again. She walked down her driveway and stopped at the curb, pointedly not stepping onto my property. She didn't look at me directly, instead focusing on a patch of her lawn as if it held the secrets of the universe. "The police," she began, her voice barely a murmur, all the shrillness gone. They said it wasn't a police matter. They said no rules were broken." "Yes, Mrs. Gable," I replied calmly, not gloating, not rubbing it in. "That's what I understand as well." A tense, awkward silence stretched between us. I could see the internal struggle on her face. Apologizing was clearly not in her nature. "Well," she finally huffed, clearing her throat, "just try to keep that dog off my perennials." "I always do my best, Mrs. Gable," I said, my tone polite but unwavering, "and it's probably a good idea for all of us to be fully familiar with the bylaws we're expected to follow. It can prevent a lot of misunderstandings." It was the closest I could get to saying, "You should have read the rules before you called the cops on me." She gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and walked back to her house. From that day on, things changed. Mrs. Gable didn't suddenly become my best friend. We didn't start exchanging pleasantries or baked goods, but the Cold War ended. The hostile stares from her window ceased. The passive-aggressive notes stopped appearing on my door. She still kept to herself, a queen on her beige throne, but she had abdicated her role as my personal tormentor. The police call, the ultimate escalation in her arsenal, had failed. She had fired her biggest cannon and discovered it was loaded with nothing but blanks. I learned a valuable lesson that day. Living in a community with rules isn't necessarily a bad thing, as long as you know what those rules actually are. Knowledge isn't just power, sometimes it's peace. It's the shield that protects you from those who would use the rulebook as a weapon, especially when they've only bothered to read the cover. As for Luna, she still chases squirrels with gusto, but I keep her leash just a little bit tighter when we pass Mrs. Gable's house, not out of fear, but out of the quiet, satisfying knowledge that we have every right to be there.